Um, so here is where we start talking about how do you excel at solving estimates in an interview, right? So please remember these points because these are probably like very, very important for you guys to be able to get your solutions right? Which is your process is going to be way more important than the answer, right? One of the things that's inbuilt in us because of the kind of mathematics that we've done in school is that we need to get our answer right, that the answer is 3.5, right? And this is also because, if you guys recall, NCRT books or most of the curriculum books used to have like a solution guide at the back, and we used to like solve a question and check the answer from the back of the book, right? And cross verify it. So when it comes to guesstimate questions, the answer is actually the process. So the answer doesn't even matter. So if I've asked Aniket to calculate the number of uh, I don't know, calculate the number of photo frames made in Australia. If Aniket comes up with a number which is like 1.55 million, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't tell me anything about what Aniket did. What I would rather want to know is how did he get to that number, right? What was the process that he followed? And that process is the actual answer to a guesstimate question. So, I mean, you can literally write nothing in the answer, and the recruiter, or in this particular case, right, the interviewer would still be happy to consider your solution in case you've written down the entire process. Although don't do that, I would still recommend you guys to mention the final answer, right? But answer carries very, very less weight. In case you're putting down the answer, it just means that you've completed the question. So you do it, you get to the final answer, which you have to, but only for the sake of showing that you were able to get to the final answer. That's it. What the final answer is doesn't matter much. Next, break down the problem in at least 4 to 5 solvable steps. So I'll give you a good example of this. I know this friend of mine, and we were actually applying for a consulting firm called Smart Cube, right, for a back-end consulting role. And this friend of mine remembered that there are like X number of public restrooms in Delhi. Okay, and he ended up getting the exact same question in the interview. So he just wrote it down, and he was like, "Bro, I'm definitely clearing this round," but he didn't, because again, the answer does not matter. What matters is the process. How did you get to the answer? So, and also, if you try to play smart, it's not really very, very helpful, right? So you don't have to get to the answer just for the sake of getting to the answer. The better the answer has been broken down into some very logical steps, the higher the odds of you being marked well for your guesstimate solution, right? And one of the suggestions that I always give to people is that you should at least break down your solution in 4 to 5 solvable steps, right? Because my friend could have easily done it. He would have been like, okay, if the answer is 1500, I'm going to assume that Delhi has, say, X number of streets, and every street is going to have 5 restrooms each, right? 300 into 5, and you could have written down 500. Would it make his answer good? Not really. So you have to make sure that you're at least breaking down your answer into 4 to 5 solvable steps. Anything lesser than that, 3 steps or lesser, is not considered to be a good answer, in my opinion, or in the opinion of most of the consultants that I've interacted with, trained, and worked with. Uh, Next, 3 types of ambiguity. So now some of the guesstimate questions are a little too ambiguous to be solved in the right way, right? For example, if I ask you to calculate the money made by the lemonade store in your closest market, money made by the lemonade store in your closest market could mean 2 things. It could mean revenue, it could also mean profit, right? So that is an ambiguity. That basically means that I don't know what I need to work for. And if I don't know what I need to work for, I won't be able to like put up a proper process of getting to the final answer, right? So to do that, you need to inquire about the same from the recruiter. And there are going to be a lot of instances where the guesstimate question that they'll be sharing with you will have an intentional ambiguity. They're actually making it harder for you by putting down some questions which are unanswered, right? Now, a very, very common confusion in this particular scenario is that people end up just assuming those things, right? Because we're anyway assuming a lot of things when we are solving a guesstimate question, right? We are assuming the population, we might be assuming the number of people living in that specific state, we might be assuming, the number of factories that are being put up, whatever the numbers are. So why can't we simply go ahead and assume that the problem is talking about profits? We can, but it's always good to inquire. So where do you ask a question? See, first of all, remember that whenever you are asking about an ambiguity, it needs to be a yes or a no answer that you're expecting from the recruiter, and not what should I do, right? Because if you try and ask what should I do, the recruiter ends up feeling that you're actually trying to like get the answer out of them, which is not the intent at the end of the day, right? Because you know that you have to solve that question to make it through, right? So I think a good way to go about it is always try and give two options. Like if you're asking a question, just say, should I go for this or that? That is probably a better way to frame for or ask ambiguity related questions, right? A very, very common ambiguity that you will see across guesstimate problems is with respect to the time period. Let me give you a very good example of this. If I'm talking about the amount of, say, the profit generated by a lemonade stall, that number is going to change depending upon the time period. If I'm talking about a month, it's going to be very different from what that amount of money would be, say, over a year or even over a day for that matter. So until unless you know the time period, you cannot actually get to the final answer. So what do? You inquire. Should I take the time period to be, say, a month or a year or something else? Right? Uh, Units. Units is another very interesting ambiguity. You'll notice that in some of the questions, they haven't really, and I'm not talking about the units in terms of kgs or pounds, right? I'm talking units in the perspective of what exactly does that terminology really mean. For example, market size itself could mean two things. Market size could mean market size with respect to the revenue, right? With respect to what is the revenue percentage or the revenue generated. It could also mean with respect to the units or the individual units of that particular commodity or product that have been sold, right? For example, if there are 100,000 units of iPhones sold in, or no, 100,000 units of phones sold in a particular city, and Samsung sells about 80% of them, then that is their market share in terms of the units. But in case Apple generates, say, 80% of the revenue, then that's a market size, but from the revenue perspective, right? So the same market can be looked around from multiple angles and perspectives. Wherever you are in this kind of a situation, it's always good to ask. But Shawrya, how do we know all of them? You will figure it out when you solve more and more questions, right? So guesstimates is a lot about practice. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll get. The lesser you practice, the lesser your odds of being able to do well in this, in this type of question, right? Lastly, I think this is something that we already know. There are infinite answers to any guesstimate question. Why? Because there are always ranges of inputs that we can do, right? Pratik might be assuming that there are 100 units of lemonade sold every day at a price point of 40. Harshada could be assuming that there are 1,000 units of lemonade sold at a price of 15, right? And Aniket could come and say that, there are about, like, I don't know, 200 units of lemonade sold at a price point of 5 rupees. And all of them are not really invalid as answers. So we can actually put up so many permutations and combinations to get the final answer. So if, say Sanaya comes and says that, Shawrya, what if I take 1 lakh units at a price point of 10,000? Does it make sense? Because we are talking about a nearby lemonade stall. Not really. That is where it completely goes out of scope and it becomes, an answer which is not acceptable. So whenever you're looking at the assumptions that you're making, ask yourself a very simple question. Does this sound realistic? If it doesn't, then you should probably not take up those numbers. Play safe. Because even logical reason, ranges could be different for different people. Let's assume that Aniket lives in like this huge township in a tier 2 city, right? And Bhavna lives in like a city like Delhi, which is of course relatively more cramped, and she lives in a small township. So Aniket says that, you know what, my township has like a park which has 1 kilometer into 1 kilometer dimension, and I play football over there, and there are so many other people who do the same. But if the recruiter feels that that's actually a little too big to sound realistic, Aniket might not be marked as well for a solution as Bhavna. So whenever you're in these kind of situations, it's always good to play safe, take more realistic numbers rather than taking numbers that straight away come out of your own context and POVs, right? Especially when you know that they're slightly extreme. If you're not able to understand what I just shared, don't worry about it because this is something that you will understand over a period of time.